"Good evening, America," Bill proclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "Tonight, we have a guest who needs no introduction. But I'll introduce him anyway, because he seems to think he's still shooting The Godfather." The audience roared with laughter. The cameras panned to Al Pacino, seated in the guest chair. At 84, he looked striking. Silver hair neatly combed, a dark blazer, a light shirt, and eyes that still burned with youthful fire. But his smile was restrained, almost imperceptible. He knew where he was. Maher was never an easy conversationalist. "Al Pacino, welcome," Bill continued, settling behind his desk. "Your new film. Something about poverty, right? Tell me, Al, do you really think another Hollywood project is going to change the world? Or is this just a way to remind us you're still kicking?" The audience laughed again, but this time the laughter was uneasy. The jab was harsh, even for Maher. Al Pacino tilted his head, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest. He didn't rush to respond. A hush fell over the studio, broken only by the faint hum of the spotlights. "Bill," Al finally said, his voice quiet but piercing, like in his greatest roles, "I'm not here to change the world. I'm here to talk about people you might not notice when you're driving your Tesla to the studio." The audience gasped. This wasn't the Pacino they expected, not a star boasting about roles, but a man on a mission. Bill raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by the retort. "Oh, so now we've got Al Pacino, champion of the poor?" Maher leaned forward, his tone turning caustic. "Come on, Al, tell us how you, a guy with a Manhattan penthouse, understand real poverty. You haven't gone hungry since the 50s, have you?" The audience murmured. Some laughed, but many felt uneasy. Bill's joke wasn't just sharp, it was humiliating. Pacino, whose film told real stories of families devastated by economic hardship, sat before millions of viewers, enduring the attack. Everyone expected him to explode or shut down. But Al Pacino did something unexpected. He smiled, not sarcastically, not defiantly, but genuinely, almost childlike. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked straight into Maher's eyes. "You know, Bill, you're right," he said. "I haven't gone hungry since the 50s. But I remember what it's like to be invisible. My mother worked 3 jobs so we could eat. I saw her cry when she thought I was asleep. And I see it now in the people who write me letters, who show up at my film shoots, who stand in line for food. You can laugh, but these people aren't a joke." The studio froze. Even the camera operators, usually bustling, stood still. Bill Maher, known for his unflappability, looked rattled. He opened his mouth to say something, but Al continued. "I'm not here to fight you, Bill. I'm here to talk about why we, as a society, let people stay invisible. And I hope you'll join that conversation, because you have a voice people listen to." The audience erupted in applause. It wasn't planned. The director in the earpiece frantically whispered to keep the cameras on Maher, but all eyes were on Pacino. His words, spoken without anger or pretense, struck a chord. Even Bill, who always had a comeback, seemed at a loss. "Well," Maher cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "That's an interesting perspective. Al, let's take a break and come back to this." When the cameras cut, chaos erupted backstage. Producers whispered. Guests in the green room debated what had just happened. Al Pacino calmly stood, adjusted his blazer, and walked to the dressing room. But this was only the beginning. The next day, the episode went viral. Clips of Pacino's appearance spread across X, Reddit, and YouTube. People, especially older generations, shared their own stories in the comments. Lost pensions, children unable to afford college, medical bills that ruined lives. Some called Pacino a hero, others a naive idealist. But everyone agreed. He'd made Maher go quiet. Meanwhile, in his Manhattan apartment, Al Pacino sat at his kitchen table, holding a cup of espresso. His phone buzzed with messages, friends, colleagues, even strangers thanking him. But Al felt no euphoria. He knew one interview wasn't enough. The question was what to do next. That same day, one of the show's producers called. The voice on the other end sounded nervous. Al, listen, we want to have you back. Bill. Well, he wants to continue the conversation. But this time, no jokes. A real discussion. You in. Al looked out his window, where New York hummed with its rhythm, sirens, horns, the murmur of crowds. He thought of his mother, the people in his film, those still waiting to be heard. I'm in, he said, but on one condition. Al Pacino's condition was simple but unexpected. He wanted the show to invite not just him, but ordinary people whose stories were featured in his documentary. Not actors, not politicians, not polished experts, but those fighting to survive every day. The producers hesitated at first. It was risky, as such guests could be unpredictable. But the viral success of the previous episode and pressure from social media forced their hand. A week later, the studio was packed again. The same scent of polish and coffee, the same hum of spotlights, but the atmosphere was different. The audience sat quietly, clutching programs that listed, alongside Al Pacino's name, three strangers. Maria Gonzalez, a 62-year-old cleaner from the Bronx. David Clark, a 58-year-old veteran who lost his home to medical debt. And Layla Thompson, a 60-year-old retired teacher driving for Uber to cover rent. Bill Maher walked onto the stage with a cautious smile. He knew this time the game was different. His team had prepared script, but after the backlash from the last episode, Bill sensed he had to tread carefully. Or, at least appear to. Welcome to Real Time, he began, hands in his pockets. Tonight, we're continuing a conversation that, let's just say, stirred up some noise last week. Al Pacino is back, and he's brought some friends. Let's give them a warm welcome. The audience erupted as Al walked out with Maria, David, and Layla. Al looked calm, but his eyes burned with determination. Maria clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. David, in an old army jacket, stood tall, but his hands trembled. Layla, in a modest dress, smiled, but her eyes glistened with tears. Bill sat at his desk, gesturing for the guests to take their seats. The cameras zoomed in, catching every movement. Tension hung in the air. The audience wondered if the conflict would reignite. So Al, Bill began, choosing his words carefully, you wanted us to talk about invisible people. Here they are. What do you want us to hear? Al looked at his companions, then at Bill. I want you to hear their stories, Bill. Not my words, not my film, but them. They're the America we don't talk about on talk shows. And I think you can help their voices be heard. Bill nodded, but a flicker of skepticism crossed his eyes. He turned to Maria. Maria, tell us about yourself. You're a cleaner, right? How did you end up in Al Pacino's film? Maria, with a slight accent, spoke softly, her voice trembling with emotion. I clean offices downtown. I work from 5 in the morning to 10 at night, 6 days a week. My daughter is sick, and I pay for her medicine. I didn't know Al was making a film. He came to our homeless shelter, where I sometimes sleep. He just listened. She paused, wiping her eyes. The audience was silent. Bill, who usually interrupted with quips, stayed quiet. The camera zoomed in on his face. He looked uncharacteristically serious. And what do you want people to know, Maria? He asked. I want people to know we're not lazy, she said, her voice growing firmer. We work. We fight. But sometimes it's not enough. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for fairness. The audience erupted in applause. Al Pacino gave Maria a slight nod, his eyes shining with pride. Bill seemed moved, but quickly turned to David. David, you're a veteran. Served in Iraq, right? Why are you here? David cleared his throat, his voice raspy but strong. I lost everything to medical bills. I served my country, and now I sleep in my car. Al found me through a veterans charity. He didn't just make a movie. He sat with me, listened as I talked about my kids, who I can't see because I'm ashamed. I'm here because I want people to stop looking away when they see people like me. Bill leaned forward, his usual irony gone. You're saying the system failed you. What went wrong? Everything, David replied. The healthcare system, veteran support, the economy. You talk about politics on your show, but do you talk about us? The ones paying the price for those decisions. The question hung in the air. The audience began to applaud, but this time the claps were not joyous, they were angry. Bill felt the pressure. He glanced at Al Pacino, who sat silently, letting his guests speak. Layla, the last to speak, raised her hand. Her voice was calm but piercing. I was a teacher for 35 years. I taught kids to read, think, dream. Now I drive for Uber because my pension doesn't cover rent. I'll put my story in his film because I wrote him a letter. I don't want pity. I want us to start talking about why people who gave their lives to work end up on the sidelines. Bill leaned back in his chair, his expression hard to read. He looked at Al Pacino. Al, you brought these people here. What do you want me to do? I'm a talk show host, not a senator. Al smiled, that same genuine, disarming smile that had silenced the room the week before. I want you to do what you do best, Bill. Talk. But this time, about them. Give them a platform. You have an audience that listens. Use it. The audience erupted in the loudest applause yet. Bill Maher, perhaps for the first time in his career, looked like he didn't know what to say. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed doubt. When the show ended, backstage was chaotic. Producers debated whether to air the episode unedited. Al Pacino sat in the dressing room with Maria, David, and Layla, listening to the stories they hadn't had time to share on air. He made no promises of miracles, but his presence gave them hope. The second real-time episode with Al Pacino and his guests sparked an even bigger reaction than the first. Videos of Maria, David, and Layla spread across X and other platforms, racking up millions of views. The hashtag Hear the Invisible trended, and petitions for healthcare reform and veteran support began circulating online. Communities in cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Miami organized screenings of Pacino's documentary, followed by discussions where people shared their own stories. But not everyone was on board. Some pundits on cable news called Pacino a Hollywood messiah, using poverty for PR. Memes on X mocked his earnestness, and posts accused him of hypocrisy. If Pacino cares so much, why doesn't he give away his fortune? Bill Maher, reverting to his usual style, took a jab in the next episode. Al Pacino thinks he's Mother Teresa, but I'm still waiting for him to sell his penthouse. Al Pacino rose above the criticism. He announced that all profits from his film's distribution would go to charities helping the homeless, veterans, and the elderly. He also launched a series of town hall meetings in community centers across the country, where ordinary people could share their stories. The first event took place in the Bronx, in a packed library auditorium. Al sat in the front row, listening as people spoke of lost jobs, unpaid bills, and dreams left behind. He offered no grand promises, but his presence inspired. Meanwhile, Bill Maher found himself in an unusual position. His audience, accustomed to sarcasm and political zingers, began demanding more discussions about real issues. Letters to the show poured in, with viewers saying they wanted more guests like Maria, David, and Layla. The producers, sensing the shift in sentiment, suggested a special episode on economic inequality. But Bill hesitated. He'd built his career challenging everyone, from politicians to celebrities. Was he ready to change his style for one conversation? One evening, 2 months after the second episode, Al Pacino received an unexpected letter. Handwritten on plain paper, it was from Bill Maher. Al, you surprised me. I don't agree with you on everything, but you made me think. Let's talk. No cameras, no script. Just two old guys trying to figure out what's going on with this country. Bill. Al smiled, holding the letter. He called Bill the next day, and they agreed to meet at a small coffee shop on the Upper East Side. The place was old, with worn wooden tables and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Outside, New York hummed, taxis honked, pedestrians rushed, and autumn leaves fell onto the sidewalk. Bill sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee. Without makeup or stage lights, he looked older, more vulnerable. Al walked in, wearing a simple jacket and scarf, and sat across from him. "Did you know this coffee shop was here when I was still doing comedy clubs?" Bill began, nodding at the decor. "Back then, I thought I'd change the world with my jokes." "And I thought I'd change it with my roles," I replied with a faint smile. "We were both wrong, weren't we?" Bill laughed, but his laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Your appearance on my show. That was something. Al, I'm not used to someone flipping my script. But those people, Maria, David, Layla, they made me feel. I don't know small." Al nodded, his eyes serious. "They remind us why we do anything at all, Bill. You have a voice, millions here. You can mock politicians, but you can also give a voice to those who don't have one." Bill looked away, tapping his fingers on the mug. "I'm not an activist, Al, I'm a comedian. If I start preaching, my audience will bolt." "You don't have to preach," Al said. "Just listen and talk. You do that better than anyone." They sat for another hour, talking about everything, from politics to personal fears. Bill admitted he was scared of losing his identity if he strayed from sarcasm. Al shared stories of his mother, who never saw his success but always believed in him. It wasn't a dramatic conversation, but it was honest. A month later, Real Time with Bill Maher aired a special episode. Instead of the usual jokes and political debates, Bill invited new guests: a social worker fighting homelessness, a single mother working 2 jobs, and a young activist campaigning for affordable education. Al Pacino sat in the audience, not on stage, but his influence was felt. The episode wasn't perfect. Bill slipped back into his jabs at times, but he listened. And that was new. 6 months passed. Al Pacino's documentary won several awards, but more importantly, it raised millions for charities. Maria Gonzalez received a grant from her local community, allowing her to cover her daughter's medical treatment and rent a small apartment. David Clark found a job with a veterans organization and began reconnecting with his children. Layla Thompson became a speaker at events focused on retirees' rights, her story inspiring other teachers to share their struggles. Al Pacino continued his town hall meetings, now joined by others, actors, musicians, even politicians. Bill Maher didn't become an activist, but his show began featuring more invisible people, and contrary to his fears, the ratings only grew. One evening, Al sat in his apartment, reading a new letter from Layla. She wrote that her grandson, inspired by the film, had decided to become a social worker. Al smiled, setting the letter aside. He looked out his window, where New York glowed with lights. The world hadn't changed overnight, and injustice was still rampant. But small steps, conversations, stories, understanding were paving the way. He picked up his espresso cup and raised it, as if in a quiet toast. To those who fight, to those who listen, and to those who, one day, might join in.